In a world that often celebrates the fleeting moments of fame and spectacle, some events cut through the noise and reveal a deeper, more profound truth. This is one of those stories, a tale of how a legendary actor's quiet strength echoed across continents and inspired a nation's leader. If this story touches your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe to see what happens next, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Your words help stories like this travel the world. The late-night talk show was in full swing, a familiar symphony of applause, bright lights, and the host's quick-witted jokes. Stepping onto the stage, Denzel Washington, a figure of Hollywood royalty, was met with a roar from the audience. He was smiling, calm, and every inch the legend everyone knew him to be. The host, energized by his presence, cracked jokes about his latest film, playing clips that showcased his trademark intensity and charisma. Yet, for all his warm laughter, there was a strange stillness in Denzel's eyes, a quiet that suggested his heart was somewhere else entirely. Midway through the interview, the host leaned forward with a mischievous grin. "Denzel, we've got a little surprise for you tonight, a live call from someone very far away." Denzel blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "What kind of surprise?" he asked. The screen behind him lit up, displaying a flag he didn't immediately recognize, the bold green, red, and yellow of Burkina Faso. A confused murmur spread through the studio audience. Then a voice came through the speakers. It was strong, respectful, and gentle, with a distinct French-tinged English. "Good evening, Mr. Washington. This is Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition of Burkina Faso." Denzel froze. The room, which moments before had been filled with a buzzing energy, went completely silent. For the first time in the show's history, the only sound was the sharp, caught breath of one man. No one, absolutely no one, could have predicted what came next. The audience stared. Denzel's hands began to tremble as the young president continued speaking. "I don't know you, Mr. Washington, but when I was a 14-year-old boy barefoot in Burkina Faso, I saw you in the movie Glory. I saw a black man, not begging, not afraid, but strong and crying for justice." Denzel blinked rapidly, the composure he held so tightly beginning to crack. "That night," Traoré continued, "I told my mother, one day I will fight for my people too, just like him." The host looked stunned, while Denzel, a man rarely at a loss for words, simply covered his mouth with a trembling hand. Ibrahim's voice grew even more heartfelt. "Years later, when the people of my country needed someone to stand up, I remembered your strength, your words, and your eyes. I stood, not because I was fearless, but because I had seen what courage looked like in you." The silence in the room was absolute. A single tear escaped Denzel's eye, slowly tracing a path down his cheek. He managed to whisper, "You're telling me I helped shape a president?" "No, sir," Ibrahim replied gently. "You helped shape a man who refused to kneel to injustice." The crowd gasped softly. Denzel leaned closer to the screen, his face a mixture of disbelief and profound humility. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming truth that sometimes a single life can echo across oceans and generations. In less than 24 hours, the world had been shaken. The clip of Denzel Washington weeping on live television was no longer just a viral moment. It was a global phenomenon. Denzel and Traoré was trending in dozens of countries as fans, journalists, and leaders praised the raw, emotional power of the exchange. Some called it the most powerful TV moment in decades, a story of an unlikely hero inspiring a real-life one. But while the world was reacting to the spectacle, Denzel Washington was quietly packing a single backpack, not for a movie, but for something that felt profoundly divine. He didn't sleep that night, the weight of Ibrahim Traoré's words replaying in his heart. The cameras had stopped rolling, but his eyes stayed red long after the studio lights went out. By morning, a quiet sense of purpose had settled over him. He booked the next available flight to Burkina Faso, choosing to travel alone. No entourage, no publicists, no spotlight. Just him, a small backpack, and a heart full of emotions he couldn't yet describe. He looked out the plane window as it took off, whispering to himself, "I don't know what I'm walking into, but I know I have to go." Back in Ouagadougou, President Traoré stood alone by a window in the palace, staring at the runway in the distance. When his aides asked if they should prepare the press, he simply shook his head. No cameras, no speeches, just truth. He knew that a moment this sacred wasn't meant for a broadcast. When Denzel's flight landed, there were no flashing cameras, no red carpet, and no fanfare. Just quiet. A black SUV waited on the tarmac, and a single man stood beside it, dressed simply, without military medals. It was him, President Ibrahim Traoré. Denzel stepped out of the plane slowly, his eyes meeting Traoré's. In that moment, no words were needed. They embraced not as a celebrity and a head of state, but as two men whose lives had unexpectedly crossed across continents, bound by a shared sense of purpose. "I'm honored you came," Ibrahim said, softly. Denzel's smile was faint, but genuine. "I didn't come as a star. I came as a brother." The SUV drove them through the dusty, unpaved roads of Ouagadougou, past bustling neighborhoods, vibrant markets, and children running barefoot, waving as the car passed. No one knew who was inside. They arrived at a modest house made of sun-worn clay and tin. "This was my home," Traoré said, his voice soft with memory. He opened the door, and Denzel stepped inside. There were no guards, no luxury, just old photos, a woven mat, and a profound silence. He had arrived at the real treasure room, and the story had only just begun. Inside the modest house of sun-worn clay, a profound silence settled over the two men. It was here, surrounded by old photographs and a simple woven mat, that President Traoré handed Denzel a wrinkled picture. In it, a young boy clung to the hand of an older woman with a wide, gentle smile and eyes full of strength. "She raised me," Traoré said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "When my parents worked day and night, she fed me, bathed me, and told me stories of strength." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "And she's still alive." Denzel stared at the photo, his heart pounding with the weight of the moment. He had come to meet a president, but he was about to meet the woman who truly shaped him. They drove another hour through winding village roads, the landscape a beautiful, rugged tapestry of life. Denzel stared at the photo of the woman, Maman Hawa, a name now etched in his mind, and couldn't help but ask, "Where is she now?" Traoré's jaw tightened slightly. "She still works," he replied, "cleaning classrooms in a rural school, at 85. He explained that she never asked for help, always insisting, "God gave me legs, I'll use them till he takes them." When they arrived, the school was worn but full of life. Children ran barefoot, drawing in the dust with sticks. Then she came into view, bent but proud, holding a broom. It was the same woman from the photo. Denzel stepped out of the car, frozen in place. President Traoré walked toward her, and when she looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "Ibrahim," she whispered, and he rushed into her arms, both of them weeping. Denzel slowly walked forward. She looked at him, her hands trembling as she touched his face. You're him," she said, her voice filled with a lifetime of recognition. In that quiet courtyard, time stood still. 3 souls, 3 stories, one moment that would melt hearts across the world. Maman Hawa sat between the two men under the shade of an old baobab tree, her hands rough, her back bent, but her voice still warm and full of life. She told stories of young Ibrahim, how he would cry in her arms on cold nights, and how he once gave her his only piece of mango so she wouldn't go hungry. As Denzel listened, with a softness in his eyes the world rarely saw, Maman Hawa reached into her old apron pocket. "I kept this all these years," she said, pulling out a folded, yellowed paper. A child's handwriting was scrawled across it. "One day, I will be a leader, and I will find you, Mama, I promise." Ibrahim gasped, remembering he had written that letter at age 9. Denzel wiped away a tear. Maman Hawa had held on to hope, the most powerful kind of faith. In that sacred moment, Denzel wasn't just visiting a country, he had found something profound. He had found the true roots of a leader. That evening, Denzel and President Traoré returned to the palace. The mood had changed. Neither man said much. Both were quiet and thoughtful, their minds still in that simple village courtyard, under the shade of the baobab tree. The encounter with Maman Hawa had moved beyond a simple meeting. It had become a pilgrimage. Traoré finally stood up. "I want to show you something I've never shown anyone outside my family," he said. He led Denzel through a private corridor with stone walls and quiet footsteps. At the end was a thick wooden door. He unlocked it, and they stepped into a small, dimly lit room, filled with old books, journals, maps, and one large framed photo, Maman Hawa and a young Ibrahim, both laughing. "This is my real treasure room," Traoré said, his voice a low whisper. Denzel was speechless. Traoré picked up an old notebook filled with handwritten notes, his first dreams for Burkina Faso. "All of this started with her," he said, holding the notebook. "I'm here because she believed I was worth something, even when I had nothing." Denzel touched the page gently, a new understanding settling in his heart. "You lead like a son who remembers love," he said. Traoré nodded. "And I want the world to know that leadership isn't about power, it's about gratitude." At dawn the next day, Denzel sat on the palace terrace, watching the sun rise over Ouagadougou. Maman Hawa's face, her laugh, her strength, it kept replaying in his heart. When Traoré joined him with a cup of tea, Denzel said, "I had a thought. Let's give her the honor she never asked for." Traoré smiled slowly, as if he had been waiting for those words. "I was hoping you'd say that." That afternoon, quietly and without alerting the press, they drove back to the village school. A small team accompanied them, but there were no cameras. Children gathered, teachers stood in silence, and Maman Hawa looked confused. President Traoré knelt before her, holding a small velvet box. Inside was a golden medallion, engraved with her name and the national seal. "For your service to this nation as a mother, teacher, and guardian of hope," he said, his voice shaking. The children started to clap, a soft, respectful sound. Denzel then stepped forward, tears welling in his eyes. He pulled out an envelope. He said, "And from the world of cinema, I spoke with my producer this morning. Your story will become a movie, and every cent will go to building schools in your name." Maman Hawa dropped to her knees, sobbing. She had spent a lifetime giving, and now she was receiving a love that echoed across the world. But the biggest surprise was still coming. By the 6th day of this unforgettable week, Maman Hawa's body was tired. She knew her time was short. She asked to speak privately with Denzel and Ibrahim. They came to her small room with no cameras, no microphones. "I'm old," she said softly. "I won't see next planting season." A tear rolled down Traoré's cheek. She reached for Denzel's hand. "You tell stories that matter," she whispered. "Tell this story." Then she took a small, faded scarf from under her pillow, the one young Ibrahim used to tie around her arm. She placed it in Traoré's hands. "My first medal," she said, and then her final words, "Take care of each other." They both held her. As she closed her eyes, the sun outside was rising, and so was her legacy. President Ibrahim Traoré stood in silence beside Maman Hawa's bed, still holding the faded scarf, a royal emblem of love and sacrifice. The room smelled of shea butter and old books, a testament to a life lived in humble dignity. Denzel knelt at her feet, his head bowed, his shoulders trembling. Quietly, Traoré spoke. She gave me everything when I had nothing, and now I must give everything back." He turned to Denzel and held up the scarf. "We will build something in her name. A school, a garden, a future." Denzel looked up, his eyes swollen with tears. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, we will. I'll help." The news of Maman Hawa's passing spread globally in less than 12 hours. Burkina Faso declared a national day of mourning. But what touched hearts most wasn't the press conferences or the formal announcements. It was a simple wooden casket sitting in the middle of the village square the next morning. There were no golden statues, no velvet ropes, just flowers, drums, and silence. President Traoré walked behind the casket alone, carrying only the scarf. Denzel followed, his suit wrinkled from sleep, his eyes red and raw. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. As the casket was lowered into the earth, the village sang and children wept. Denzel, a man who had commanded armies on screen, stepped forward, his heart laid bare. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a necklace, his father's. "She reminds me of him. Strong, quiet, and never asked for anything." He placed it on the grave and said, "Goodbye, Mama." Even the camera stopped filming, for some things are too sacred for screens. That night, President Traoré and Denzel sat under the stars on a straw mat, the fire cracking quietly between them. They didn't need speeches. They had just buried the woman who shaped both of their lives, one with her hands, the other with her spirit. "Denzel," President Traoré said, "this week I remembered who I am." Denzel nodded. "Me too." In that quiet night, they made a pact, sealed not in ink, but in pain, gratitude, and hope. Within hours, plans began for the Mama Hawa Foundation, a joint initiative to provide food and education for rural children. Denzel committed a full year's salary from his next film to it. But the most powerful part wasn't the money. It was the new short video he released just before flying home. He looked into the camera and said, "If one woman in a small village can raise a future president and change the heart of a Hollywood actor, then what are we waiting for?" 3 days after the funeral, a statue was quietly unveiled in Ouagadougou. It was not of a general or a king, but of a woman holding a child's hand wrapped in a familiar scarf. The bronze plate below read, "To Maman Hawa, the mother of all leaders." President Traoré and Denzel Washington stood before it, both holding candles. Neither spoke, for some endings are too sacred for words. And as the wind blew softly through the city, villagers said they could feel Maman Hawa's spirit brushing against their cheeks. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, made you think, or reminded you of someone you love, please like, subscribe, and comment below with, "I believe in the power of love and leadership." Your words matter. Let's make stories like this travel across the world. Let's remind people that greatness is not about fame, it's about heart. Drop your thoughts below, share this video with someone who needs hope today, and never forget, one kind act can echo across generations. Thank you for watching.